Morning, this is Brian. Today is Wednesday, July 10th, 2024, and I'm here along Father Junipero Serra Road here at Mission Trails Regional Park near the Visitor Center. And today it's time for a very long-awaited spotlight video on a plant that I have pointed out so many times. And I'm finally going to spotlight today. And what is our subject for today? It is chalk Dudleya. Finally! This guy here, Dudleya pulverulenta. Chalk Dudleya is a perennial succulent herbaceous plant in the Stonecrop family, and that is the Crassulaceae. Same family as our ornamental jade plant, Crassula ovata, and some of our native plants like Crassula conata and Crassula aquatica, which are small annual stone crops. But chalk Dudleya is can be a quite large perennial, can be a quite large plant at times. And I'm going to be going from spot to spot along this road here, so I can point out as many different specimens as I can, because these can be kind of almost hidden in plain sight. Sometimes you literally have to be on one to find it, and other times you'll see them everywhere. But yeah, Dudleya pulverulenta, and it's a eudicot. In other words, a plant with two cotyledon leaves when it germinates. So I'm going to go ahead and start moseying down so I can find some more chalk Dudleyas, and we can start talking about this plant. So here's one chalk Dudleya right here. This one has a pretty decent sized rosette, and you can see the rosette has a lot of the older leaves that are wrinkled and dying away, and then as you can see, that chalky color is due to a chalky like powder that covers the leaves. And as you can see, like most Dudleyas, we have a major rosette of leaves at the base of the plant, right where it joins the soil and the roots underneath. So chalk Dudleya can be a very commonly found plant here in Southern California, often found in shady, especially shady slopes, sometimes rock outcrops, and sometimes underneath other shrubs in generally coastal sage scrub and chaparral habitats, generally below 4,000 or 5,000 feet, but I have seen it near 5,000 feet in Cuyamaca Rancho State Park here in San Diego County. But again, the name chalk Dudleya comes from the very chalky leaves, and pulverulenta deals with the dusty, chalky texture of the plant. So you can see there, that nice, beautiful rosette right there. And as I touch the plant, get a little chalk residue on my fingers. That's where pulverulenta comes from, the chalk covering. So let me get a couple pictures and start talking more about the other features of this plant. So yes, chalk Dudleya is definitely a pretty big fan of very steep hillsides, and sometimes within small cracks of boulders and rocks, and then also as an understory underneath other shrubs, like some of its co-eds here, like the beautiful California buckwheat, the San Diego bush sunflower, and sometimes also in the understory of oak woodlands. But Dudleys don't always grow on steep slopes, but that's where they tend to be found more often. And their rosettes can range from pretty small to quite large. There are a few with some pretty big rosettes. I've seen Dudleyas with fat, huge rosettes that are bigger than a dinner plate. This one right here is about the size of a dinner plate, but I've seen them get even bigger than this. And the leaves can vary a little bit. Typically narrow. They can be narrow, or they can actually be quite wide. So this one here tends to have a narrower leaf profile, as you see here. But some of these leaves can get quite wide here on these Dudleyas. Alright, so I've been hiking along Father Junipero Serra, trying to find some more Dudleyas. So here's another rosette right here. Here's a big, juicy, fat, beautiful chalk Dudleya rosette right here. Yes, it's a really good specimen right here. There's another one. Again, loving these hillsides, these steep embankments. Here's another one here. Right over here. Yeah, sometimes they grow in some very tight spots. They can take root in these rocky areas. But there's a lot more to chalk Dudleya other than just its chalky leaves. I want to talk about the flowers of chalk Dudleya. So, Dudleyas are in 3 different subgenera. I've mentioned this on my Lanceleaf Dudleya episode back in May, that there are 3 different subgenera of Dudleya. There's Dudleya, Stylophyllum, and Hyacinthus. We are looking at Dudleya pulverulenta, and this one is in the subgenus Dudleya. So it's in the typical subgenus of Dudleya. So we're in the subgenus of Dudleya, and the subgenus Dudleya is characterized by flowers that really don't open very much. And on chalk Dudleya, it's kind of a pinkish reddish color, usually from late spring to midsummer. We're going into mid-July right now as we speak, and usually by June these things start blooming, sometimes late May, but a lot of times June is a good time. June and early July is a good time to see chalk Dudleya in bloom. You can see here, typical for subgenus Dudleya, the flowers do not open very much. The other subgenera, Hyacinthus and subgenus Stylophyllum, the flowers open up more in a more radiant fashion. And that's looking at other species like Dudleya edulis. Dudleya edulis is one of the examples of the flowers that open more widely, and that's in a different subgenus. But here we go again. Got these pretty ornate looking reddish flowers, usually late spring to midsummer. And so you'll notice that by early spring, you'll start seeing the rosette start sending up these arm-like protrusions, which become the very large inflorescences that can actually get much larger than this on older plants. Sometimes these things can go for a good few feet up in the air above the rosette. And then, of course, they're subtended by these fleshy leaf structures called bracts. So they got these little bracts. They're almost like bracts or stipules. As you can see, it's a kind of a leafy inflorescence coming right from the base of the plant, right from the base of the rosette, coming up vertically, and then it branches at the top. As you see here, it's very much branched. Usually, let's say at least once branched. As you can see here, it branches out one layer. And you get these oval, or these kind of pointy, not sharp, but point-tipped, auriculate, in other words, clasping around the stem type leafy bracts. And that's pretty common in Dudleya species to get leafy bracts going along the inflorescence stem. But again, red flowers. And then, after the flowers are pollinated, they turn into seed capsules. And which is pretty common in Dudleyas. You have these seed capsules that split open in a radiant fashion when ripened and dried, roughly star-shaped, usually about 5-chambered about 5 chambered seed capsule, very small seeds for the next generation of plants. So this is a previous year's inflorescence that was pollinated and turned into seed capsules. So now what I want to do is get a picture or two of this plant here for some close-up, hopefully some better details, and then we'll move on to some more closing thoughts about Dudleya pulverulenta. So I'm walking along here. Dudleya populations are quite interesting to take note of. And why I'm saying that is you can go for a long distance in what would be suitable habitat and not see one single Dudleya. Again, they love these steep hillsides, lots of rocks. Again, not necessarily a requirement for them, but they seem to prefer, again, rocky hillsides. So it's not a requirement, but this tends to be their preference. So sometimes you'll be in an area where it seems to be appropriate habitat and you won't see anything. And then boom, all of a sudden there'll be one spot where they're all over the place. And that's kind of how it's been here for me today, trying to document this species. As you can see here, telltale sign that they're here. Sometimes the rosettes are very well hidden amongst the rocks and the shrubs. But then once you see the inflorescences, their presence is verified, much easier to see. Very handsome plant. Would do very well in a dry xeriscape habitat. As you see here, coastal sage scrub is quite dry during the summer, and Dudleyas are adapted to summer dry and winter wet conditions. So this would make a very good garden plant were you to have a spot with very well drained soil, preferably a rocky, and even more preferably a north-facing exposure. They tend to prefer north-facing slopes, but can be found on south-facing slopes too sometimes. But they tend to prefer a little bit more on the north side of the hill. Now, Dudleyas can be confused with another genus of plants that are related called echeverias, and I've mentioned this in my spotlight video on the lanceleaf Dudleya, Dudleya lanceolata, that echeverias are related plants. Now, as I mentioned before when I was talking about the gardening aspects, that Dudleyas live in typically pretty arid climates, from dry coast to the desert, and typically on the coastal side of the mountains experience dry summers and wetter winters. So a similar garden plant called the echeveria, which is a related genus of plants, also in the Crassulaceae, the echeverias typically come from climates that are summer wet and winter dry. And like I said, they're pretty similar plants. They're fleshy perennials that are very amenable to cultivation. A lot of species in Mexico and Central America, and in here they make great garden plants. But the way I look at it is, if you can grow native, I would go for that instead. Dudleyas make excellent garden plants. Given well-drained soil, if you want, even get large rocks, chisel into them a little bit, maybe put a little dirt, try to grow a Dudleya seed inside. And try to grow your own Dudleyas. That's why I say very much an advocate of growing native plants, and Dudleya pulverulenta is definitely not an exception to that. There we go. It's another inflorescence right here in the middle of this shrub here. So, where are you likely to find Dudleya pulverulenta besides on rocky slopes? Well, you can basically find it from the coast, the immediate coastline, like Torrey pines and stuff like that. You can find that all the way up into the inland foothills. And again, I've seen it at Cuyamaca Rancho State Park at 5,000 feet elevation. And I believe you can find it on the desert side of the mountains as well. And generally, once you get well down to the desert, it usually gets replaced by more specifically desert species. But Dudleya pulverulenta can be very common here in Southern California, in San Diego County, Orange County, LA County. I've seen it in plenty of places, San Bernardino County. Chalk dudley is a very common plant when you get up to a good population of it. I'm going to post on the screen the more specific range of this plant. But as for now, this is basically going to do it for my spotlight. Hope you enjoyed it. And see you on the next one. Thanks for watching.